Q&A. Steve asked me to give a quick overview of my life. So we'll be here for 3 days. No, it's just about a few minutes of my political journey and also very briefly some thoughts about the Republican Party in the age of Trump. And as I said, would love to engage with you all. I was born in Dallas, but grew up in Washington State, and developed an interest in politics at a very early age. We had a cabin in the Cascade Mountains. I was on the east side of the state, and I still remember as a kid driving with my parents to our cabin. We went every weekend. We would talk about public policy. We always listened to the news at the top of the hour. And I was just a question asker. So I would ask my dad, why did the Israelis and the Arab world not get along? What about President Nixon and Henry Kissinger? And so those issues really fascinated me, along with sports. And then when I got to high school, I got into debates with my social studies teachers. They were liberal. I was conservative, not because I thought through political theory, but mostly because my parents were conservative. So it was always a passion. I went to University of Washington, and my undergrad was political science, and a big deal to me, it was critical to my own career, was actually internships. I was an intern at the Washington State Senate when I was a junior, worked for a state senator, Dick Hempstead, in Olympia, and then came out to DC when I was a senior at the University of Washington, and interned at a place called Center for Strategic International Studies. And that was one of the big breaks that I got. I had assumed I would return to Seattle, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. I guess I assumed I was going to go to law school because I didn't want to be a lawyer. I thought, well, I need that as a credential. But I did have an interest in, at some point, getting involved in politics. When I was at UW, I used to go to Suzzallo Library, which is the main library on the campus, beautiful campus in Seattle. And I would listen to John F. Kennedy speeches on my own time, to the point that I actually memorized them, not for credit in a course, but just because I had listened to them so often. And I really kind of fell in love with language, with the power of words. And I thought Kennedy's words were very powerful. And I read biographies and autobiographies, people who had worked in various administrations, and I thought, wow, wouldn't that be great someday to work in a White House? And I ended up making my way to one. That internship at CSIS, I got some jobs in the think tank world, including when I was just a young buck at Ethics and Public Policy Center. Eventually was hired as a speechwriter for William Bennett, who was Secretary of Education for Ronald Reagan at the time. I was intimidated when I went over. I remember calling my colleagues at Ethics and Public Policy Center the day that I got there and said, man, if I crash and burn, would you guys take me back? Because I felt like I was dropped in the deep end, and that I didn't really know how to swim. But it worked out. I developed a good relationship with Bill, then worked in the George H.W. Bush administration as an aide and speechwriter for Bill when he was the so-called drug czar. And then in the 90s, I was policy director at a think tank called Empower America, which is Jack Kemp, who was a very large figure in the conservative movement in the 80s and 90s. Jack tragically died years ago. Bill, Jean Kirkpatrick were really the founders of Empower America. And I was there really through the 90s. And then was hired as a speechwriter for George W. Bush when he became president after the Florida recount was taken care of. Michael Gerson was the chief speechwriter. The president was one of my closest friends. I got to know Mike when I was in Empower America. And he hired me as deputy director of speechwriting. And I did that job for 2 years. Just an anecdote on the speechwriting side of things, Mike would normally go to the senior staff meetings, which were held at 7:30 in the Roosevelt Room. But when he was not there, I would go in his stead. And I remember the morning of September 11th being struck that this was one of the most uneventful days of the Bush presidency. And the big topic of conversation is there was supposed to be a congressional barbecue on the south lawn of the White House the Tuesday late afternoon of the 11th. And so when I get back to my office, I did what I always did with mine, which is I wrote him an email recapitulating, summarizing what had happened in the senior staff meeting. And I first line of my email was nothing much is going on today. And that was sent precisely 5 minutes before the first trade tower was hit. Mike was actually had been at home working on a community's character speech because we had gotten a number of our main initiatives, taxes and education, passed by that time, and we were thinking through what's the fall agenda going to look like for the White House. And so Mike was working on his community as a character speech. The first, the plane hit the first tower, and like most people, I thought this was a tragic accident. I went down, got some coffee, went back up to my office. A few minutes after 9, the second plane hit, and of course you immediately knew something else was going on. We were under attack. So I called Mike, and he was on 395, one of the main arteries here in the DC area. He said, "Man, it's like a parking lot. I'm just stuck in traffic. It's moving." And he had commented on how low a plane had flown. Well, he was on 395. It turned out that was the plane that hit the Pentagon. And in a moment like that, you find out where you rank on the totem pole of importance in the White House. So if you're an important, significant figure, when they evacuated the White House, because they were getting all these reports about these attacks that were coming in, who said that the Capitol was being hit, the State Department was being hit. And so if you were important, they took you to a bunker, secret bunker. If you were me, you ended up on the corner of 17th and Pennsylvania, and looking up the sky, wondering what is going on here. And I remember distinctly having this feeling. It was a beautiful day. It was a crystal blue sky, and looking up and thinking, I feel like I'm in a movie. Except in a movie, it has a script. You know how it ends. And I thought, this one doesn't have a script, so I don't know how this thing's going to end. Anyway, I was there. As you can imagine, I was really ended up at the time as a speechwriter. Words of the president always mattered. They particularly mattered after September 11th. And then I went on to, after a couple of years, Josh Bolton, who later became chief of staff, had recommended me to become director of something called the Office of Strategic Initiatives, which is a kind of in-house White House think tank. And that job really was perfectly aligned for my interests and skill sets. And there I was involved in policy, politics, communications. It was a kind of in-house White House think tank. To the extent that I had influence in the White House at that point, it wasn't because of where the office fit in a flow chart. It was really based on the relationships with people in the White House and in other offices. But I got along well with everybody. It was a really good experience. And I was there really until 2007, August 2007. And that's when I went to Ethics and Public Policy Center, where I have been since then. And that's a think tank here in Washington. My world now is primarily writing for the New York Times and the Atlantic, and do commentary on television and so forth. When I got involved in politics, I wasn't cynical about it, and I'm still not. I don't think I'm naive about politics. I understand there are downsides to it, and there are people who are involved in politics who are not embodiments of virtue and nobility and high-mindedness. But that's true in every profession in life. But I do think that politics matters, because I think politics is finally and fundamentally about justice. It's not all that it's about, but at the key moments in American history and in the life of the nation, politics can have a big bearing on justice and human flourishing and human good. So it matters. And the truth is, most of the people that I've come across in politics, including people that I disagree with philosophically and in terms of party politics, are generally good people. And most people get involved, in my experience, with politics for the right reasons. Some of it's mixed. Motivations are mixed. Ambitions, personal ambitions are there. And again, that's true in every profession. It's in the nature of the human condition. but most people that I know want to get in politics because they have some ideas that they care about, some causes that they want to pursue. And my attitude is good for you, and it matters, and stay involved and keep fighting. Just very quickly, I've been, as you could figure out, a lifelong Republican. From my earliest days, my first vote was for Ronald Reagan in 1980, and I've worked in 3 administrations in the George W. Bush White House. I'm philosophically a conservative, and have been my entire life. I am however, a pretty sharp critic of Donald Trump, and so I'm not really particularly aligned with the Republican Party right now. There are a group of us conservative critics of Trump who at this point can fit in a phone booth, and so it's not a large group, but we're making the arguments that we can. It's slightly complicated and have to go into it during Q&A. I don't disagree with all of Donald Trump's policies, though I disagree with some of them. But I think the danger he poses is in a whole realm of other areas, and I think he's a threat to the country, to the conservative cause, and to the Republican Party. And I say that as someone who's still a conservative. I'm not one of those who became so disaffected by what's happened that I sort of changed my political philosophy. I'm actually a critic of the president, in part, I think, because I am a conservative. But it's made life interesting, as you can imagine. I've got a lot of friends over my lifetime who see things very differently than I am. I'm a person of the Christian faith, and been associated with mostly evangelical churches throughout my life. And white evangelicals are overwhelmingly supportive of Donald Trump, though there's a spectrum about how enthusiastic they are. But I'm out of step there as well. So part of my life these days is trying to make sure that relationships stay intact, even while we have disagreements, because I think friendships are more important than politics. And I think that it's extremely important actually to have relationships and friendships with people who don't see the world the same way you do, politically, theologically, and in every other way, because I think that's part of the way that we learn. And it's important to be able to see other people's perspectives, even if you don't agree with them. I don't have a clue what's going to happen in 2020, but I'm happy if you want to have a conversation about what might unfold. But as for me, I'm a writer on contemporary affairs. I write on politics primarily, also on faith, sometimes on sports and other things. And as a writer, you just try and put these things in perspective. You call them as you see them. You have an obligation, I think, to tell the truth and to speak the truth as well as you can, to be open to being wrong, and hopefully amending your views along the way. But as for me, there aren't many jobs I can imagine. One that I could do particularly well, but also ones that would be as satisfying for me as I've been involved with. Because these conversations, these debates, I think, are important. It's a chance to learn and a chance to talk about things that matter. And there are worse things in life than that. So that's basically my life in 8 or 9 minutes. And other than that, we'll just open up the Q&A, and you can ask anything you want, in either my own experience, politics, theology, or anything else. Sure, let's start over here.
Okay, my name is Kristen Reagley. I'm from the Harvard Extension School. I was curious, we've done some readings today on how the Tea Party has affected the Republican Party,
right.
And as well as we've had a few conversations about Donald Trump not necessarily being a very conservative Republican.
Right.
And so I was curious, since you've been a lifelong Republican, self-stated, if you thought that these sort of, I don't want to say conflicts, but challenges to the Republican line, if they result in a strengthening of the Republican Party down the line, or if it's something that you feel causes too much disruption to the party and takes away from its overall value.
Yeah, great, thanks. Those good questions. Let me take both of them up. The Tea Party first. It's a really fascinating journey of the Republican Party in recent years, because the Tea Party movement really, I guess, grew. The genesis of the Tea Party movement was the bailout of the banks after the 2008 financial crisis, which I actually think was an almost unmitigated success. If there's, by the way, there's a really good documentary called Panic, the untold story of the 2008 financial crisis. It's Vice that puts it on. I don't think it's HBO. In any event, it's actually they interview the key protagonists during the 2008 crisis: Paulson, Geithner, Bernanke, President Bush and Obama, Jeff Bolton, and others. And it's just a fascinating account of what had happened. And to make a long story short and simplify dramatically what happened, they had to bail out the banks, so what was a very, very nasty recession and financial crisis didn't become a depression, but that bailout of the banks caused a tremendous populist anger and upsurge, because they said, look, why are the banks getting bailed out when these individuals don't? And that was a completely fair question to ask. The answer is that the banks went belly up, so did the rest of the economy. There'd be huge collateral damage, and they ended up paying back the TARP loans. But that is really what catalyzed this kind of populist revolt. The Tea Party was a very strongly limited government movement, populist, anti-establishment. And that really drove the 2010 midterm elections, which was very damaging to the Democratic Party, because prior to that, President Obama had control of the Senate and the House, and he lost control after the 2010 midterms. But the Tea Party has really kind of petered out. And what's interesting is that Donald Trump is in many ways the antithesis of the Tea Party movement, because he himself is not by any standard a limited government conservative. He was the one person who ran in the 2016 primaries in the GOP field that said, he's not going to touch entitlement reforms. He has no interest in cutting government spending, never articulates the case for limited government. And himself has certain views that I think are probably contrary to capitalism, but certainly the size of government. And yet he's wildly popular within the Tea Party movement. So the Tea Party movement as an intellectual movement doesn't exist anymore. But what the Tea Party movement, I think, embodied was this populist anger, which Trump masterfully tapped into in 2016 and has really every day since he's been president. And so there's a kind of connection, I think, between the Republican base and Trump, at least as it speaks to the Tea Party, which is not policy-driven, it's not intellectual, it's, I think, much more affective, that it's almost psychological and cultural, and a kind of connection on the level of, they frankly revel in the style of his politics. So I don't think that the Tea Party is a force in the Republican Party right now. In terms of Trump not being a conservative and whether it's going to strengthen or weaken the Republican Party, it's a mixed bag. It depends, I think, in what area you're talking about. If you're talking about, say, judges, the judiciary, deregulation, pro-life policies, the tax bill that was passed in 2017, those fall generally under the canopy of the Republican Party, traditional policies, conservative policies. But in a lot of ways, he's not a conservative. Is basically his America first, or quasi-isolationist instincts are not conservative, at least not as conservatism has been understood in the modern era. He's a fierce protectionist. He refers to himself as tariff man. As long as I've been alive, conservatism stood for free trade. And then, as I mentioned, the issue of limited government. Trump can't, I don't think, be understood as a conservative, but he has to be understood as a populist, and that at least is what he's tapped into himself. I don't think he's a populist. I don't think he's anything other than a narcissist. But I think he tapped into this populist movement. Will it strengthen or weaken the Republican Party? I don't know, because I don't know how this is going to play out. I'm worried about the Republican Party because one of my warnings to Republicans during the nomination when Trump was running, and then since he's become president, is that he would redefine it in his own image, and he has. And I've had plenty of conversations with Republicans in Congress who know better, who have views of Trump that are similar to mine, but they feel like they're not in a position to be able to speak publicly about that for a variety of reasons. I think it's a mistake, but I understand their position, and it's easier for me than it is for them. I really don't know. I think the Republican Party right now, I would say it's in a fairly precarious position, and one of the reasons I say that is that the trajectory of events is just not good. Trump is toxic with rising number of voters, whether they're people of color, younger voters, women, suburbs, and I think if you look at the results of the 2018 midterms, you can see the coming catastrophe longer term. I live out in Virginia, near the 10th district, and our representative House member was Farmer Comstock. In 2016, it's a slightly Democratic, so purplish district, or was, and Hillary Clinton, I think, won it by about 4 or 5 points, and Barbara ran and she won reasonably comfortably in 2016. In 2018, she got obliterated. She lost by 12 points, and that is a kind of classic suburb, Republican-leaning suburb. And if you look at what happened in 2020, every Republican got voted down. I think that's going to kind of happen. But whether Trump leaves in 2021 or 2025 or somewhere in between, it'll be a big fight for the future of the Republican Party.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Yassine and I go to Suffolk University. And my question is referring back to your anecdote on the day of the unfortunate event of the September 11th. Since that day, did you see the evolution of nationalism in politics, and specifically within the Republican Party? And if so, do you see it getting better or worse in the coming election?
Yeah. No, I didn't. I certainly didn't see it in the aftermath of 9/11. The Republican Party was just a very dramatically different party, and the country was different. The country was generally united after 9/11. When I began to see the changes within the Republican Party and how it was changing toward a sort of ethnic nationalist flavor, so probably right around the mid-2000s, we were pushing a comprehensive immigration reform bill. We ended up, after the re-election of President Bush, which was 2004, so out of the box. In 2005, our big initiative was effort to reform Social Security, which went nowhere. And then we tried immigration reform later in 2006, and almost got that immigration reform bill through, but it ended up failing. We missed the sequencing. In retrospect, we should have led with immigration rather than Social Security. But for the purposes of your question, what was interesting is you began to see, or you could see, this rise of anti-immigrant feelings, some sense of hostility, cultural displacement, beginning to build in the party. And that just didn't exist in the 90s or early 2000s. I was never able to locate exactly what catalyzed that. You know, there was no event, like if an undocumented worker, you know, had a massacre at Tyson's Corner or a mall at Minneapolis St. Paul or something that emotionally catalyzed the response. I would understand that, but there were factors going on that I didn't really understand. Honestly, President Bush understood what was beginning to happen within the base of the Republican Party, because I remember talking to him and others were in these conversations, and he would talk about nativism, protectionism, and isolationism, these things that were beginning to rise up. Other thing which was interesting, kind of canaries in the coal mine, where it was conservative talk radio. So if you listen, say, to Rush Limbaugh, went national in 1988, for most of Limbaugh's career, the binary choices here was conservatism and liberalism. But near the end of the 2000s, you began to see the shift in him and others where it went from conservatism, liberalism to establishment and anti-establishment. And so by the 2010s, 11s, you were almost as likely to hear criticism of John Boehner and Mitch McConnell as you were of Barack Obama. So there was this feeling of anger for the establishment, and things were not as they wanted. So you could if you were tuned in, you could tell that there was these elements coursing through the country, the base of the Republican Party, which now I think is manifest in people like Tucker Carlson. And there's a sort of ethnic nationalist movement, people that goes by various names. It's not specific just to America. You see it across much of the Western Europe as well. It was interesting. So Trump got into the race in June of 2015, and my first column in the New York Times was July 2015. And the headline was "President Trump ? Just say no." And so this was 3 weeks after he got in. And I later learned from my editor that it was hard to get the piece published because people at the Times thought, why is he writing about Donald Trump? This guy's going to dissolve, in a matter of weeks. He's not a threat. I knew he was. I didn't think he would win the presidency. But I knew enough about the conservative movement that I knew he was tapping into something which I thought was pernicious. Others were happy with it. But in any event, I didn't think he should be underestimated. And lo and behold, he's president. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Shabeli Gonzalez, and I'm from Miami-Dade College. And I would like to know any impactful experience, challenge, or hard decision that you have made as a Christian in the political world. Sorry.
Yeah. Hard decision or challenge as a Christian in the political world. That's a really good question, and I thought about it. I must say, for the most part, I have not. I've not found myself in a position where I felt that my Christian beliefs or my Christian ethics were in conflict with life and politics. And to some extent, I think I'm probably fortunate because the people that I surrounded myself were people of integrity. It doesn't mean that we didn't make mistakes along the way. But I just wasn't around people who I felt like had defective character or were asking me to do things, certainly as an individual in terms of personal integrity, to lie or cheat or anything like that. So I've never had that kind of issue or that kind of conflict. Policy-wise, I will tell you one issue in which I remember having debates was with colleagues in the White House, and this really was informed from a Christian perspective, and that was on the issue of enhanced interrogation techniques. Critics called it torture. I wasn't involved in the genesis of that program. Very few people were, and they were all, you can imagine, it was a top secret program. But it was when it came out, which is it was this defensible or not. And so I remember, maybe they were releasing our emails from those years. I don't even know when those things get released, but talking through with colleagues, a number of whom are Christians, which is what are the pros and cons of this? Can this be justified or not? It was used in very limited circumstances to a very few number of people in an effort to try and get information to try and potentially prevent catastrophic future attacks. But it's an age-old question, which is means and ends. Where do you draw the line? And I actually had lunch with a friend of mine, Gary Halligan, who runs a terrific organization called International Justice Mission. And Gary, who's his close friend, his friend at the time, was concerned about it from a Christian perspective. And so I brought him into the White House, and we met with some people at the National Security Council and elsewhere to talk through those issues. I was always uncomfortable with the program. I could, so often you can come up with scenarios here in which I think you could justify what was done, but you'd have to do so with a certain queasiness, because this is not as kind of thing that you want to normalize. But most people can come up with a scenario. If you say, look, you've got a high-ranking terrorist with information. Let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that waterboarding will elicit information, and that information would save 50,000 lives. Is that, let's just for the sake of the argument, is that something that could be justified morally? I think it could, but again, I think you have to be wary about taking those steps. So that was one in which, just as a Christian, I was thinking it through. But as I mentioned, I've not really felt virtually any tension as a person of the Christian faith. I think most of it is, quite frankly, it's just being alert to the temptations of power, and how easy it is to justify it. And in my own experience, with having been involved with a lot of Christians who are involved in politics, there's this real, I guess it is a temptation to sacralize, baptize public policy, and to think that you're fulfilling the will of God, and God has, God is on your side rather than you trying to be on God's side. Of all the groups that have been involved with in politics over the years, there's no group, I don't think, that has been as susceptible to the seductions of political power as Christians, quite frankly, in politics. It's an odd phenomenon, because if you're a person of Christian faith, there's very much a sense that, we're citizens of two kingdoms, or my kingdom is not of this world, Jesus said, and there's supposed to be some kind of distance between us and our life here. That's not really what gives us meaning or purpose. And yet, for reasons that are complicated, I think a lot of Christians are very easily seduced. Chuck Colson, who had a famous conversion, he was kind of political hitman for Nixon before his conversion, later said that they were about the easiest people when he was in the Nixon White House to seduce. You just basically had to give Christian leaders a picture with the president, and that was his labor leaders. At least you had to negotiate over something tangible and real. But I think for a lot of Christians, it was access to power that really rung the bell.
Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Galen Bernetti from the University of San Diego.
Hi.
I had a question about how you feel from your lens of analysis working underneath the Bush administration. How do you feel about the contrast between the Bush administration and the Trump administration with escalations in Iran?
Yeah, well, I feel quite a contrast with President Bush and President Trump on all sorts of grounds. Because they're completely different human beings. And I have a much higher view of one than the other in that realm. In terms of the strike on Iran, I mean, we could have taken out Soleimani, just like President Obama could have taken out Soleimani if we wanted to. I'm wary about the decision to have done it. I understand. I don't shed any tears for it. He was a really malevolent figure and has figured American blood and lots of blood, including American blood, on his hands. So he was really one of the nastier actors on the world stage. And so the fact that he's gone, I don't shed any tears for him, and I don't think others should. If it turned out, and I don't know, as I don't have access to the intelligence, and even if you do, as we learn the hard way, sometimes intelligence is wrong. Was he planning imminent attacks? This was the phrase that the Trump administration used against Americans and American targets. If that in fact was true, that could change the calculus some. If he was deciding that he was going to escalate these attacks, hit embassies, hit American personnel, you can make the argument that maybe you needed to take him out. How he was taken out, the celebratory nature of it, the way that Trump embraced it rather than a covert operation, I think there are questions about that. Obviously, it escalated the situation massively. Anybody could have figured that out, given how prominent he was in Iran. Is it worth it? I suspect not. I think there's several layers that you have to look at it. There's obviously the kinetic military aspect of it. Do we get into a hot war with Iran? We don't know. Is either side going to take the off-ramp here that the Iranians struck us yesterday with the in Iraq? Apparently no Americans were killed. That may have been intentional, may not have been. But maybe that's the end of that story. But then there are a lot of other things that are catalyzed. What happens in Iraq? There was a vote, non-binding vote in the Iraqi parliament to get rid of the United States. If we were to leave Iraq completely, I think that would be very much in Iran's interest, Russia's interest, and not in America's interests. I've been in conversations with high-ranking people, including who served in the Trump administration. There's a tremendous amount of concern and worry about certain Arab allies who are now lining up to make deals with Iran because they're afraid. Trump basically said, you fenced off attacks on American interests, but not our allies. So they're worried. There's just a lot of chaos in the region. There was growing antipathy to the Iranian regime just a month or two ago. Sanctions were biting. And now, of course, this has ended up being a galvanizing point for the Iranian people around the Iranian regime. So my hunch is that as this plays out, that the costs will be higher than the benefits. That was certainly the calculation that both President Bush and President Obama made. I think they were right. I think you could say that taking out Soleimani was morally justified. It doesn't mean it was wise or prudent. Those are two different questions. And finally, if I were to design a president to have in the Oval Office during a period of crisis of any kind, particularly international, I'm not sure Donald Trump would be the president I would design. So that concerns me as well. I just think he's volatile. If you talk to people who worked with him, he doesn't listen to advisors. He's extremely impulsive. And I don't think that's a good quality in a crisis.
Agreed, thank you.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Mary Miller, and I'm from Central Michigan University.
Hi.
And my question is, you stated that you and some others have not been disillusioned from Trump and the Republican base currently on your conservative values. So for 2020, if and probably when Trump gets the Republican nomination, would you still consider voting for him, or would you vote for the Democratic nominee, or would you go third party, and why?
Yeah. I said I wasn't disillusioned with politics. I've been disillusioned with Donald Trump, or maybe not, because I didn't really have any illusions about him. But I won't vote for him under any circumstances. I didn't vote for him in 2016. I was no fan of Hillary Clinton. In that case, I voted for Evan McMullen, who was running as third party. What will I do in 2020? It depends on who the Democrats nominate. I frankly haven't quite figured that out, other than I know I won't vote for Trump for a whole variety of reasons. But we'll just have to see. The way I try and think about this, and I'm certainly not. I'm sure my analysis isn't perfect in how I think it through, but one has to think first about the good of the country. And there's the realm of policy, then there's the realm of the political and civic culture. There's the temperament of the person as president, if you feel safe with him or not, and psychological and emotional makeup and well-being. There's the future of the Republican Party if he's reelected. What is it may be parentheses in the Republican Party and in our politics becomes something different. If his mode of politics is ratified, then I just think we're dealing with something else. I find his non-stop assault on truth and the categories of truth and falsity to be extremely dangerous and harmful. And I think they're having an effect. If it were Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, I just am philosophically opposed to them. So it would be hard for me to vote for them and be consistent with my beliefs. So we'll have to see. I understand the arguments, of all. I honestly do understand the argument of people who vote for Donald Trump, who were, if you're a person conservative, even a conservative Christian, and you feel like his policies will do more to advance what you believe is the good of the country, moral good of the country, economic good of the country, that's a fair and reasonable place to be. It's not where I ended up, but I get that. I think my main criticism of Republicans in general, and particularly of evangelical Christians, I must say, isn't that they would vote for Donald Trump, is that they become a sword and a shield, that they seem incapable of holding two ideas at the same time, or at least voicing two ideas at the same time, which is we agree with his policies on judges and deregulation and taxes and abortion, but we also think that he's a moral and ethical wreck, and that really troubles us. He acts in ways that are reprehensible and need to be challenged. You can't hold those two ideas at the same time. There's no trick to that. But Republicans and Christians in particular aren't doing it, and in fact, they're not only sub voce, they're not only go quiet in the face of his ethical transgressions, they will defend him. And in a weird way, it's slightly amusing to see these people who use morality, moral integrity of presence, like a 2x4 against Bill Clinton back in the late 1990s, and made all these arguments about the centrality of moral leadership. Many of the very same people will defend Trump no matter what he does, and attack those who deign to criticize him. So that double standard, that hypocrisy, I think, is the area in which I think that they deserve to be criticized, and I've frankly never heard of a good response to that criticism. But part of what it indicates, I think, is the degree of political tribalism, polarization that we have, and this fascinating psychological phenomenon of confirmation bias and motivated reasoning, which we all suffer from and deal with, which is this ability that we have just as human beings, or propensity that we have to interpret facts that are favorable to us and to wall off facts that are contrary to what we want. So that's always been part of the human condition, it always will be. But it seems to me that it's particularly acute now, and then when you see somebody like Donald Trump, it's in such sharp relief that it really underscores. I've said to a number of friends of mine that I think it's much more important now to have a good understanding of psychology to understand this political moment than it is to have an understanding of politics. Because I think a lot of what's going on has to be understood through the prism of psychology.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Hello, I'm Sarah, and I'm from Elon University. In terms of Trump's policies, you mentioned that there are several that you're against and some that you support, and I was wondering which were in each category and why.
Yeah, on the plus side, generally his judiciary appointments have been I think, solid. He's outsourced it to the Federalist Society, which is a group that started, I think, in the 1980s. And they are judicial intellectuals, and basically they've got a list of judicial appointments of whom they generally are very, very well qualified. And Trump has taken that list. I'm quite certain that he doesn't know the writings of any of the Supreme Court nominees or his federal judges, but he's doing what he's being told. And that's fine. I wish that happened in more areas with him. So the judges, I think, are good. People I trust in the world of economics and business tell me that the deregulation has actually helped a lot of economies, helped the economy grow. So I think that area has been good. I'm pro-life, and his policies there I think have been good. Tax bill, I've sort of mixed on, but you could argue, I think, that on balance maybe it was a good thing, but I'm not certain about that. Downside on the policy where I disagree with him, he's as I said, protectionist, and I'm not. I think protectionism is a bad idea, and it can lurch you into some very, very bad economic situations. I think he's removed morality not only as a centerpiece of foreign policy, but from anything at all. I think the way that he treats dictators is often offensive and weird. I don't know if you have a love affair with a foreign leader. I don't know why you choose Kim Jong-un on any number of grounds, but he just seems to be infatuated with what's arguably the most ruthless dictator in the world, and by the way, the chief persecutor of Christians in the world. So there's that. He doesn't believe in limited government or the reform of entitlement programs. I think that if you're not going to reform entitlement programs, you're not making a serious case for limited government. So I disagree with him there. I think he is making appeals, nativist appeals, as well. It was his, if you will, trump card during the election. Every time he got into trouble, what did he do? He would point to the other, whether the other were Mexicans or the other were Muslims, and he plays to that. I happen to think that you have to disaggregate. There are undocumented workers, then there's legal immigration. Certainly sympathetic to the latter, and I felt like on the former we needed to find a path to citizenship, but not amnesty. I thought that was reasonable then. I think it's reasonable now. But as a general matter, I'm somebody who has I guess an emotional affinity for legal immigrants, but I also think on the merits it's the right way to go. And I think you can make adjustments to who's coming in, sort of high-skilled workers, and what's best for the economy of the country. So that's where I disagree with him. But as I said, my primary objections to him are not in the realm of policy, although the separation of children from parents is something that I found deeply offensive. But I think he's psychologically and emotionally unwell, genuinely so, and that worries me. And as I said, this assault on truth and reality and the conspiracy mongering, I think, is really, really bad. And I think he's unfit on all sorts of different levels.
Thank you.
Huh?
And we have come to time for our program.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.